My name is Emily. I'm 26 years old, and last Christmas I watched my entire childhood flip in one sentence. For most of my life, I was the background noise in my own family. My mom could spend an hour talking about my brother's latest big plans and forget to ask me a single real question. I was the kid who did her homework alone at the kitchen table while everyone else cheered for him. I got used to being the invisible one until that night. We were sitting around the Christmas table, the usual scene: turkey, mashed potatoes, Christmas lights blinking in the window. My mom was leaning toward my brother, asking about his new business idea, laughing, promising she'd help however she could. I was there too, quietly cutting my food, like always. Then my brother looked at me with that little smirk he's had since we were kids and said, "So, are you still wasting your time on that worthless company of yours?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't snap back. I just shrugged and said, as casually as if I were talking about the weather, "Actually, I sold my company." The whole table went quiet. My brother laughed under his breath. "That worthless company? Sure. How much did you sell it for?" He even did the air quotes. I looked him in the eye and said, $150 million. His jaw literally dropped. My mom's face went white. The fork slipped from her hand and hit the plate. In that moment, every year she'd ignored me, every time she made me feel small, came crashing back on her instead of me. If you want to know how a daughter her own mother dismissed for years ended up dropping a $150 million bomb at Christmas dinner, and what it cost my family after that night, stay with me until the end. I wasn't always the woman who could drop $150 million at a Christmas table and watch her mom turn pale. At 8 years old, I was just the quiet kid hiding in the kitchen doorway, clutching a chipped plastic cup while my brother's 13th birthday looked like a coronation. His name is Alex, 5 years older than me, and from the very beginning he was the star of the family. That day, my mom, Karen, rolled out a brand new mountain bike into our backyard in the suburbs of Seattle. It gleamed in the sun, neighbors clapped, kids cheered, someone yelled that Alex was going to go far in life. My mom hugged him so tight it looked like she was afraid someone might take him away, whispering how proud she was of him. I stood a few feet back in an old thrift store t-shirt, and no one even asked if I wanted to be in the pictures. For Alex's birthdays, there were balloons, outdoor parties, 3-layer cakes, and sometimes entire weekends built around him. For mine, there was usually a cheap cake from Costco, a couple of candles, and my mom half apologizing because she was so busy. One year, Alex got a Disneyland trip as a graduation present. I got a card from the drugstore and some cash in an envelope left on the kitchen counter. When Alex hit school age, my mom fought like crazy to get him into an expensive private school. He had crisp uniforms, brand new sneakers, soccer practice, piano lessons, summer camps that cost more than our car. I went to the local public school with peeling paint and outdated textbooks. When I asked why things were so different, my mom would pat my shoulder and say, "Alex needs special stimulation. He's really smart. He has so much potential." "You're fine, Emily. You'll be fine." It sounded like a compliment at first, but "you'll be fine" slowly turned into, "we don't have to try for you." My dad worked long hours at a bank and was barely home for dinner. Even when he was, he mostly let my mom make every decision: schools, activities, money. There was this invisible hierarchy in our house: Alex at the center, my mom orbiting around him, my dad off on the sidelines, and me somewhere on the edge as long as I wasn't causing trouble. By 12 or 13, I stopped asking for things. I stopped asking why Alex got the new phone, the new laptop, the extra tutoring, and I didn't. I stopped running into the living room with my A+ tests, because every time I did, my mom was on the phone with one of Alex's teachers or driving him to practice. If I needed extra books, she'd sigh and ask if I really needed them. For Alex, the answer was always yes. For me, it was always maybe later. So I learned to do things myself. I started watching YouTube videos to teach myself how to cook basic meals because I didn't want to ask for takeout money. In middle school, I picked up a dishwashing shift at a nearby coffee shop, saving every tip in a jar in my closet. That jar eventually became my first used laptop. I began noticing every small slight and filed it away, not just to hurt about it, but like a list of reasons to never, ever depend on them. At the dinner table, the conversation was always about Alex, his soccer game, his SAT scores, the colleges he might get into. I was there, but I was never the story. I was the extra chair. Somewhere in those years, something in me quietly shifted. I stopped trying to get my mom to see me and started planning a life that wouldn't require her to. I didn't know it yet, but all those nights being the invisible kid in the corner were doing something important. They were turning into fuel. Fuel for an idea, for a company, and eventually for that Christmas night when my mom would finally be forced to look straight at the daughter she'd spent decades ignoring. College was supposed to be my clean break, my chance to finally step out of the background. I got into the University of Washington in Seattle with a partial scholarship for computer science. When the email came in, I sat on the edge of my bed and read it 3 times just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. My mom glanced at the screen, smiled, and said, "That's great, honey," before asking if I could help her proofread an email to one of Alex's teachers. A week later, Alex got into Stanford, and it was like the Super Bowl had come to our living room. There was a party, relatives over, champagne, a banner. My mom cried and told everyone her son was going to change the world. When I left for UW, she hugged me at the curb, said she was proud of me, and drove off because she was running late. When Alex left for Stanford, she flew down with him, helped decorate his dorm room, and posted a whole album of photos on Facebook. My move-in day was a couple of suitcases and a used comforter I'd bought with my own money. I lived in a cramped apartment near campus with 2 roommates, the kind of place where you could hear someone sneeze in the next building. My scholarship covered part of tuition, but not everything. To survive, I picked up a part-time job at a Starbucks a few blocks from campus. I'd wake up at 4:30 a.m., throw on my green apron, and spend the morning spelling people's names wrong on cups, then rush to algorithms or data structures lectures with coffee stains on my sleeves. Between classes, I'd sit in the library with my beat-up used laptop, watching free coding videos on YouTube and Coursera because the official textbooks were too expensive. While everyone else joined clubs and went to parties, I was learning how to build basic apps. I didn't feel sorry for myself. Honestly, it felt kind of good, like I was slowly building something that was mine. The idea that changed everything started in the most boring way possible. People complaining. My friends were constantly exhausted. They'd pull all-nighters, eat trash from vending machines, skip the gym for weeks, then crash and wonder why they felt like zombies. My roommate would say, "I wish something would just tell me when to get off my ass and drink water." One afternoon, sitting at a sticky cafe table between shifts, it hit me. What if there was one simple app that helped people keep track of the basics? What they ate, how they moved, how they slept, and actually nudge them to do better, without being annoying or complicated. I started sketching screens in a cheap notebook. Little graphs for sleep, color-coded bars for workouts, reminders that looked more like friendly texts than alarms. I called it Health Track, mostly because every other name I thought of sounded stupid and the domain for that one was still available. I'd come home from my night lab, make instant noodles, and code until 2 in the morning. The first version was rough, but it worked. You could log your meals, your workouts, your water, and see how your week looked. I gave it to a couple of friends and told them to be honest. They immediately tore it apart. This button sucks. I forgot to log because there's no reminder. Why is this chart so ugly? It stung, but I fixed everything they complained about. Little by little, more people started using it. A girl in my stats class told her boyfriend, who told his frat brothers, who told their entire group chat. Someone left a random positive review that made me cry in the bathroom at work. When HealthTrack made its first $500 from in-app ads, I stared at the dashboard for a full minute. It wasn't much, but it was more than my family had ever invested in me. I took that money and bought a slightly better used laptop so I could code faster. Around that time, Alex would call from Stanford talking about frat parties, networking events, how insane the tech scene was. My mom would gush about his business classes and all the doors that would open for him. One night, I tried to tell her about HealthTrack. I told her I had a little over 1,000 users, that people were actually using something I had built. She paused, said, "That's nice, sweetie," and then immediately launched into how Alex might get an internship at a big-name company because his professor liked him. I sat there with the phone to my ear, listening to her talk about my brother's hypothetical opportunities, while my very real little app was quietly installing itself onto strangers' phones. It was like that over and over. Every time something went right, a class I aced, a new feature I shipped, a small bump in downloads, my mom either didn't ask or changed the subject to Alex. Eventually, I stopped bringing it up. I let her believe I was just doing some computer thing and getting by. Meanwhile, I kept grinding. I studied during my breaks at Starbucks, scribbled code on napkins, read documentation on my phone while waiting for the bus. I watched people in the campus gym checking their phones between sets and imagined HealthTrack sitting on all of them. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I wasn't even thinking about money yet. I was just chasing this weird electric feeling I got every time someone said, "Hey, this actually helps me." I didn't know it then, but those late nights and ignored phone calls were the beginning of something way bigger than a college side project. HealthTrack was quietly growing roots, and so was I. And at some point, those roots were going to push straight through the floorboards of the little box my family had always kept me in. Graduating early wasn't part of some grand master plan. It was just what happened when you take extra credits every semester because you can't afford to stay in school longer than necessary. While my classmates were debating gap years and backpacking through Europe, I was signing a lease on a tiny office space in a gray building in Seattle's tech district. It had ugly carpet, flickering fluorescent lights, and a view of a parking lot. But to me, it felt like a kingdom. HealthTrack wasn't just a side project anymore. I filed the paperwork, incorporated the company, opened a business bank account, and moved my whole life into that small room with 2 mismatched desks and a secondhand couch I found on Craigslist. My schedule got even more intense. Mornings were for customer support emails and bug fixes, afternoons for new features, nights for teaching myself marketing from free podcasts and blog posts. I answered every review personally, DM'd users who quit to ask why, begged a designer on Upwork to make my app look a little less like something built in a basement. Slowly, the numbers started to shift. Downloads weren't just a trickle anymore. People were sharing screenshots of their progress on social media. A local trainer reached out and asked if he could recommend HealthTrack to his clients. Then another. A small gym asked if we could create a custom onboard message for their members. I said yes to everything. I built a basic premium tier. Nothing crazy. Just a few extra features and deeper insights for a few dollars a month. When our annualized subscription revenue hit $50,000, I stared at that number and felt the room tip a little. It wasn't quit your life money, but it was this is real money. Real enough that I hired 2 junior developers fresh out of school, kids like me who just needed someone to bet on them. We cramped into that tiny office with laptops and cheap coffee, eating takeout and pushing updates every week. Somewhere in the middle of all this, Alex's big Stanford dream started cracking. His first startup, some kind of hyper-local delivery app, tanked. He burned through $100,000 of my mom's money, shut it down, and moved back home. Karen called me crying about how hard the world was for her poor boy, how he just needed one good break, how she was worried about his confidence. She barely asked what I was doing. When she did, it was a vague, "That app is still going okay, right?" Like I was talking about a hobby, not a company. I kept my answers short. "Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, we're growing." I didn't mention revenue. I didn't mention employees. It felt pointless. While Alex was working part-time at Target and later at Best Buy, talking about getting back into the startup scene soon, I was negotiating our first partnerships with actual companies. A chain of gyms wanted a branded version of HealthTrack. Then an insurance company reached out about possibly rewarding their users for healthy habits tracked through the app. I was still driving an old Toyota and wearing the same sneakers from college, eating Chipotle on the office couch. So from the outside, nothing looked impressive. Inside my little world, everything was shifting. One day, an email popped into my inbox from a business development guy at a very large tech company. They wanted to talk about strategic options, which is corporate language for, "We might want to buy you." I walked into that meeting in my only decent blazer, palms sweating, trying not to look like a kid who still lived on takeout. They offered $50 million for HealthTrack. 50. With more zeros than my 8-year-old self could have imagined. For a moment, I pictured calling my mom, heard her finally saying, "I knew you had it in you." Then I listened to the rest of the offer. They wanted full control. They wanted to optimize the monetization funnel, which was a fancy way of saying they wanted to shove ads and upsells into every corner of something users trusted to take care of their health. It felt wrong. I said no. My lawyers almost choked, but turning that offer down sent a different signal into the water. If one big player wanted us, others might too. A local venture capital firm that focused on health tech reached out. They didn't want to buy, they wanted to invest and help us scale. I negotiated hard and took $8 million, enough to grow, but not enough to lose control. We opened a second office in Portland, hired more engineers, expanded our mental health tools. HealthTrack integrated deeply with Apple Health, Fitbit, all the big wearables. We crossed 1 million active users. Annual revenue climbed into 8 figures. At 25, I signed the papers on a modest penthouse in Seattle with a view of the water. I filled it with IKEA furniture and plants I mostly forgot to water. I still drove the same beat-up car. I still wore hoodies to work. But my life was no longer small. The offer that eventually stuck didn't come from a flashy tech company, but from a giant healthcare group that wanted to bring preventative wellness into their system. They didn't want to gut the app. They wanted to keep my team, keep the brand, and use their resources to reach more people. They offered $150 million. We negotiated terms for months, my days a blur of contracts and video calls and numbers that made my teenage brain short-circuit. When I finally signed, I walked out of that final meeting numb. After taxes, after bonuses for my team, after all the fees, I was left with roughly $90 million, $90 million more than anyone had ever thought I would have, including me. I didn't call my mom. Instead, I called a therapist. Sitting in that small, quiet office, I talked for the first time in my life about what it felt like to be the invisible kid, the "you'll be fine" child, the afterthought. We went through every birthday, every brushed-off achievement, every time my mom chose to save Alex instead of even seeing me. I expected to feel triumphant. Mostly, I felt tired. Sessions turned into months, I started donating to health nonprofits, especially ones focused on women who needed mental health support. I realized something that surprised me. I didn't actually need my mom or Alex to clap for me anymore. Their opinion had stopped mattering somewhere along the way. What I did need, though, was closure. Not revenge in the cartoon sense, not some dramatic scene where I threw money in their faces. I wanted to know, for my own sanity, what would happen if I walked back into that house not as the invisible daughter, but as the woman they had refused to see. Christmas was coming, and for the first time in years, I found myself looking at flights to Seattle. My therapist was the first person who suggested I go home for Christmas. Not because she thought my family suddenly deserved me, but because she wanted me to see, in real time, how different I'd become. Treat it like an experiment, she said. Not a reunion. You're not going there to get something from them. You're going there to observe. So that's what I told myself when I booked the flight from Portland back to Seattle. It wasn't a homecoming. It was data collection. I could have driven. But there was something symbolic about flying into the city I grew up in as the founder, who had just sold her company for $150 million. I didn't tell my mom about the sale. I just texted her that I was free this year if she still wanted me there for Christmas. She replied within seconds, more enthusiastic than I expected. Of course, Alex will be here too. It'll be just like old times. The heart at the end almost made me laugh. Old times were exactly what I was nervous about. I booked a room at a hotel near the airport instead of staying at the house. That decision alone felt like drawing a line in thick black marker. For years, I'd slept on that sagging twin mattress in my childhood room, the one with the peeling posters and the bookshelf full of borrowed library books. This time, I wanted a door I could close that wasn't hers. On Christmas Eve, I landed in a gray Seattle afternoon. The clouds were heavy, the air wet and familiar. I checked into the hotel, dropped my suitcase, and just stood there for a minute looking at the clean, anonymous room. White sheets, neutral art. No history. No ghost of a younger me trying to be seen. The next day, I drove my rental car to my mom's house. The neighborhood looked smaller somehow. The same cracked sidewalks, the same pitiful little park at the end of the street. Her house still had the faded blue paint and the overwatered lawn. The only thing different was the plastic Christmas reindeer on the lawn, one of its antlers bent. My heart picked up as I walked up the front steps, but it wasn't fear. It was more like stage fright. The door opened before I could knock. My mom stood there in a flour-dusted apron, cheeks pink from the oven heat, the smell of roasting turkey rolling out behind her. For a split second, I saw the mom I used to chase after with drawings and test scores. Then the moment passed. She pulled me into a quick hug, more polite than anything. "Emily, you look so grown up," she said, stepping back to look at my coat, my shoes, my face, like she was evaluating a stranger's outfit. "How's work? Still doing your computer stuff?" "Yeah," I said, shrugging. "Still doing my computer stuff." She nodded like that answered everything and immediately launched into an update about Alex. "He was doing so much better," she said. "He had this amazing new business idea and was really turning things around." Her eyes lit up in a way they never did when she looked at me. "You'll see. He's been working so hard. I'm just so proud of him." I stepped inside. The house smelled like nutmeg and sugar and dish soap. The same artificial Christmas tree stood in the corner of the living room, loaded with old ornaments. There were framed photos of Alex in his football uniform, Alex at Stanford, Alex in a suit at some networking event. None of me. Not one. I spotted a picture from when we were kids. Alex on his new bike in the backyard, my mom's arm thrown around him, me blurry on the edge of the frame, half cut off. I almost smiled. "Alex," my mom called toward the living room. Your sister's here." He was sprawled on the couch, watching an NFL game with a beer in his hand, one sock on, one off, like always. He muted the TV and stood up, giving me a once-over. "Well, if it isn't the coding queen," he said with a crooked grin. "Still single? Still buried in your little app thing?" I could feel my mom watching my reaction, waiting for me to laugh it off like I used to. I just smiled. "Nice to see you too, Alex." I put my bag down and followed my mom into the kitchen. She handed me a dish towel like nothing had ever changed. "Can you help with the salad? We're doing the cranberry one you liked when you were little," she said, already moving back to basting the turkey. She poured a glass of wine and set it in front of Alex, then poured one for herself. She didn't offer me any, just gestured toward the tap water like she always had. It was such a small thing, but it was all there. The invisible ranking, the automatic deference to him. I chopped vegetables, listening to them talk about his big plans, how she was going to help him get this one off the ground for real this time. No one asked if I'd driven or flown, where I was living now, what my days looked like. I realized I didn't care. I wasn't that kid anymore, waiting for a turn. I was taking mental notes. How she kept circling back to Alex. How he soaked it up. How automatically I had slipped into the role of quiet helper in the kitchen. When she finally called us to the table, my pulse picked up again. The plates were set the same way they always had been growing up. Alex at one end, my mom nearest to him, me off to the side. I sat down in my old spot, but I wasn't the same person. This time, I wasn't here to disappear. I was here to see exactly what happened when the ghost in the corner finally decided to speak. Dinner started the way it always had, with my mother directing every bit of attention toward Alex. She passed him the mashed potatoes first, laughed at every lukewarm joke he made, and asked about his big new venture like he'd already gone public. He launched into a rambling explanation about an online sports gear store, how the market is wide open, and he just needed a little capital to get it off the ground. My mom nodded along, eyes shining. "And of course I told him I'd help," she said, glancing at me like she expected approval. "A little push now, and he'll be unstoppable." I took a sip of water and kept my face neutral. The conversation rolled right past me. They bounced from his business idea to his workout routine, to some story about a guy he knew who almost got signed to the NFL. I could have been a piece of furniture for all they noticed. When my mom finally turned to me, it was with the same half-interested tone she used with telemarketers. "So, Emily," she said, cutting into her turkey, "you're still doing your computer job, right? Working on that app?" I set my fork down, feeling the weight of the moment float just out of reach. I could have said everything right then. Instead, I shrugged. "Yeah, still working on it." She smiled, relieved she didn't have to follow up. "As long as you're managing to pay your bills, that's what matters," she said, like I was a teenager babysitting for gas money. Alex smirked, swirling his wine. "Come on, Mom," he said. "You know Emily, she's fine. She's got her little project." His eyes flicked to me, and I saw it. The same condescending glint he'd had since we were kids. "Still wasting your time on that worthless company?" There it was, the word from the hook I'd been carrying around in my chest for months. Worthless. I didn't flinch. I didn't roll my eyes or snap back. I just looked at him and said casually, "Actually, I sold my company." The room went quiet so fast I could hear the hum of the fridge in the next room. My mom froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. Alex let out a short laugh. "What?" he said. "You sold it?" He did the air quotes again, the way he had when we were kids talking about my little coding thing. "To who?" "A healthcare group," I said. "They bought HealthTrack." Saying the name out loud in that house for the first time felt strange, like introducing a stranger to a family that had pretended you didn't exist. Alex snorted. Okay, so what? You got what? A couple $100,000? Enough to move out of your little shoebox apartment? His face was bright red now, half from the wine, half from the idea that I might have actually done something real without him. How much did you sell it for exactly? My mom was staring at me, eyes wide. Yes, she said softly. How much? I met his eyes and saw the challenge there, the assumption that he was still above me, no matter what I said. I let a beat of silence stretch out until I could feel the tension buzzing in the air. Then I said, clear and steady, $150 million. His jaw literally dropped. It wasn't just a saying. His mouth actually fell open, like his brain had disconnected from his body. The fork slipped from my mom's hand and clattered against her plate. Her face drained of color so fast it was almost comical, like someone had pulled a plug. For a second, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then everything happened at once. That's not funny, Emily, my mom whispered. That's not a nice joke. You're lying, Alex snapped, regaining his voice. You're not that smart. Nobody pays that kind of money for some stupid phone app. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, unlocked it, and turned the screen toward them. I'd left the banking app open because some part of me knew this would happen. The balance stared back at them, a number so long it barely fit on one line. This is after taxes, I said quietly. After paying my team. After everything. My mom leaned in, eyes darting over the digits, lips moving as she tried to count the commas. Alex grabbed the phone from her, hands shaking, and started scrolling like he was looking for a trapdoor. When that didn't satisfy him, he snatched up his own phone, typing furiously. A few seconds later, I watched my own face appear in the reflection of his glasses. My headshot from an article. His eyes scanned the headline. I already knew what it said because I'd read it once, alone, at 2 a.m. 26-year-old founder sells health app for $150 million. There it was, in black and white. He scrolled, and I heard him mutter phrases under his breath. Under 30, fastest growing, mental health features. He stopped reading and looked up at me like he was seeing a stranger. My mom's eyes were wet now. Why didn't you tell us? She asked, voice shaking. How could you keep something like that from your own family? I let out a short breath that was almost a laugh. You mean the way you kept everything for Alex? I said. The private school? The trips? The $100,000 you gave him for a startup that failed? The way you forgot my birthdays or tossed me a grocery store cake while you flew down to move him into Stanford? Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. That's not fair, she finally managed. We did our best. We supported you. We always— No, Mom, I cut in, my voice sharper than I intended. You supported him. You invested in him. You built your whole life around him. You told me I'd be fine, and then acted like that meant you didn't have to try. You made sure he had every chance, every safety net, every excuse. I built everything I have without a single one of those things. You don't get to play the victim now because your invisible child turned out to be the one who actually did something. Alex slammed his fist on the table, making the glasses jump. So what? You think you're better than us now? He shouted. You think money makes you special? You're still the same weird little sister who ate lunch alone and hid in her room. You just got lucky. I stood up slowly, napkin falling from my lap onto the floor. My hands were steady. My heart was not racing. It felt strangely calm, like this scene had been rehearsed 1,000 times in my head, and I was just hitting my marks. Luck didn't write a single line of code, I said. Luck didn't answer customer emails at 3 a.m. or refuse a $50 million offer because it wasn't right. Luck didn't fix your messes, Alex. Mom did. Over and over. I looked at her, really looked at her. She looked small, defeated, like the foundation she'd built her world on had just cracked straight down the middle. "You gambled everything on the wrong child," I said softly. "And now you're just angry that the one you ignored learned how to win without you." My mom reached out like she was going to grab my wrist. "Emily, wait. We can talk about this. Maybe you could help Alex. Invest. We're family. We should stick together." There it was. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I was wrong." Just, "help Alex." The hierarchy she'd built was so deep in her bones, she didn't even hear herself. I picked up my phone and slid it into my pocket. "I did stick together," I said. "For years. You just never noticed." I pushed my chair back from the table. The Christmas lights blinked lazily in the window behind them, reflecting off their stunned faces. "Enjoy dinner?" I added. "Merry Christmas." And then I walked out of the house I grew up in, leaving my mother pale, my brother speechless, and 20+ years of being invisible sitting at that table behind me. The fallout from that Christmas dinner didn't happen all at once. It was more like a slow-motion collapse. I went back to my hotel that night, kicked off my shoes, and sat on the bed in the dark, staring at the city lights through the window. I half expected my phone to explode immediately. It didn't. The first wave hit the next morning. Long, rambling texts from my mom about family and misunderstandings, mixed in with accusations that I had humiliated my brother on purpose. A few hours later, Alex chimed in, calling me selfish, ungrateful, accusing me of turning my back on the people who raised you. I didn't answer. 2 days after that, a letter showed up from a lawyer representing both of them, demanding $3 million as compensation for the years of support, housing, food, and education they had provided. Reading it was like watching someone put a price tag on a childhood they barely showed up for. I handed it to my own attorney, who wrote back in language much colder than I ever could have. He politely declined, then attached a detailed breakdown of my parents' financial records my accountant had pulled together. Every tuition payment for Alex, every check for his failed startup, every major expense with his name on it, and a big fat zero next to mine. At the end, he added that if they pursued their claim, we'd have no choice but to make those records part of the public record. The next message I got was short and frantic. "We're dropping it. Let's just forget lawyers." There was no apology, just retreat. Somewhere in the middle of that mess, Alex's life started to unravel. He was already fragile, furious that I'd passed him in a race he didn't even know we were running. He drank more, showed up late to his job at Best Buy, snapped at a customer who recorded the whole meltdown on their phone. The video hit a local Facebook group where people connected the dots between the ranting guy in the blue polo and the online posts he'd made, trashing his rich, ungrateful sister. A week later, he was fired. His new big idea for an online sports gear store never really got off the ground. Between credit card debt and a small business loan he didn't understand, he sank fast. My mom tried to save him the way she always had, refinancing the house, pouring whatever she had left into his black hole. It still wasn't enough. Within a year, the house I grew up in was gone, sold to cover debts. My mom moved into a much smaller apartment. Her health started to decline. Relatives who had watched her worship Alex for years pulled away when they realized how badly she had misplayed her hand. That next Christmas, I was in Hawaii with a small group of friends from the tech world. We swam, hiked, and sat on a balcony overlooking the ocean while I wired a sizable donation to a nonprofit that funds therapy for women who can't afford it. At some point, my phone buzzed with a message from a younger cousin. She'd seen the article about me and wrote that my story made her feel less crazy for being the overlooked kid in her own house. I invited her to call me anytime she wanted to talk about careers, money, or just life. She did. I became the mentor I had needed at 16. Months later, an envelope arrived at my office. Inside was a handwritten letter from my mom. She said she was sorry. Sorry she had favored Alex. Sorry she hadn't seen me. Sorry it had taken a headline about millions of dollars for her to realize what she'd thrown away. She wrote that she wished she could go back, that she hoped one day I would forgive her, that maybe we could start over. I read it once, then again. I didn't frame it, I didn't rip it up. I just put it in a drawer. The truth was, I had already done the forgiving that mattered. I had forgiven myself for not being able to fix her. I didn't send money. I didn't rush back in to rescue them. Setting boundaries was the only way to keep from becoming another one of their bad investments. I poured my time into my new company. This one focused on mental health and AI tools that actually help people check in with themselves. I told parts of my story on conference stages and eventually in a TED-style talk, not as a victory lap but as a cautionary tale about what happens when a family builds their world around one golden child and treats the other like a backup plan. Here's what I learned, the part I hope sticks with you more than the dollar amount ever could. Your worth is not determined by how loudly your parents clap for you, how much they spend on you, or whether they ever admit they were wrong. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to stop standing in front of people who refuse to see you and build a life where you no longer need their approval to breathe. Favoritism doesn't just hurt the kid who gets ignored. It cripples the kid who gets worshipped too. My mom lost her house. My brother lost his job, his excuses, and his safety net. I lost the fantasy that one day they'd wake up and magically become the people I needed them to be. In exchange, I got something better. A life I chose, built on my own terms, full of people who actually show up. If you've ever been the invisible one, the you'll be fine child, maybe you don't have millions or a headline, but you do have a choice. You can keep waiting for them to see you, or you can start seeing yourself. And if you were in my place, what would your version of walking out of that Christmas dinner look like?